Hi everyone, my name is Cynthia. Let's talk books. And today I'm here to talk about the books that I read in March. And I'm sorry for the shakiness of the camera. All right, so let's get right to it. In March, my reading slowed down a little bit. Once you get down to it, it was not a ton. I still read 1, 2, 3, 7. I still read 12 books this month, and that is a really good number. For me, it falls within what I typically read in a month, but I definitely felt like it slowed down quite a bit because of the COVID-19 pandemic. It hit right in the middle of March here in Southern California, so we shut down all the schools, and then I moved. Anyways, let's move on. Let's talk about the books I actually read. The first book that I finished in March was Strangers in Death by J.D. Robb or Nora Roberts. This was a solid entry into the series. If you haven't heard about the series, it's a kind of futuristic, kind of serialized murder mystery series in which you follow this cop, Eve Dallas, in like the 2050s, late 2050s. And it's got 50 books, the series so far. And let's see, Strangers in Death is book number 26. And solid read. I enjoyed it. It dealt a lot with like the business world, and it involved Eve Dallas's husband work quite a bit. So solid entry. This is my comfort food. The next book that I finished in March was Invisible Women, Data Bias in a World Designed for Men. This was a 4.5 read for me. It was really good. I listened to it in audiobook, and some of the information I already knew, like if you kind of follow like the news and stuff about gender bias, then some of what is in this book will not be news to you, but it still managed to bring in new information to me, and it's all about the ways in which data is not neutral, not just objective, because there are humans behind it that have embedded in like algorithms certain biases. And so a lot of it does deal with like the way a lot of Silicon Valley companies have these biases that favor men, right? And that privilege men as like the typical person, because that's their go-to a lot of times. And these, as a lot of technology is created, women are not present at the table, and so like women and women's needs get left out of a lot of discussions. So it features, the book gives you a lot of data and a lot of analysis, and it's really, really good. I really enjoyed it. It would have probably been a 5-star read, except that a lot of this was not totally new to me. I did listen to the audiobook, and it was quite good, so I usually recommend nonfiction books and audio book because they can be a little bit easier to get through. So this was a very solid, very good read for me. The next book that I read in March was quite a disappointment. It is Books Can Be Deceiving. This is by Jenn McKinlay, and it is the first in a library lover's mystery. So this is the Cozy Mystery series, and I'll be honest, I really wanted to read the series because after the first book, all of the covers feature like a schnauzer, and I happen to have one. He's sitting right over there sleeping, so I'm not going to disturb him. So yeah, this was one of those things where like, oh, a dog that looks like mine is on the cover of the series, so I picked up the first one, and it was not that interesting. It felt extremely predictable and kind of boring. I do like small town mysteries. This one features a librarian, and I thought I was really gonna like it, but this first one I did not like. I'm still gonna give some of the other books a shot because I have at least one more in my physical shelf, and I'm hoping that once the dog's involved, it'll be much more, much better series. But this one unfortunately was a miss, and I had to give it 2 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was Longshot by Kennedy Ryan. Time for me. So the writing and the characters are fantastic. It is a romance novel, so it does have a lot of sex. This one also has a lot of content warnings. It is about domestic abuse, and it features on the page rape. That was the hardest part of the book to read, and the only reason why it's not a 5-star book. Like, I love the characters, I loved the writing, but it went a little overboard with the depictions of the domestic violence and the rape scenes. Like, they got very graphic, and you should be aware of that before going in. Fortunately, as I started reading it, I saw some reviews of this that warned me about this happening, so I was able to get through it, and I knew to expect it, but some of it was unnecessary. I felt like I get the point about the horrors of domestic abuse without it having to be so explicit. But still, I will definitely read more by Kennedy Ryan because the writing was just so good. The points were just really well made. Yeah, really, really enjoyed it. It's also features a professional basketball player. So if you're into basketball stories and want a romance novel with domestic abuse, this would be it. And I should say, the hero is not the abuser. Ooh, I should make that very clear because otherwise that could be real iffy. But the next book that I finished in March was The AI Who Loved Me by Alyssa Cole. This is an Audible original, so you can only find it if you have Audible or like Audible Escape, which is how I got it, because I got a free trial of Audible Escape, and this book is fantastic. It was a 5-star read for me. It's romance, sci-fi, content warning for like PTSD and trauma, but it's not on the page. There are robots or artificial intelligence, and it is fantastic. If like those boxes are in your like love list, you definitely need to pick this one up. It's also a really short book. Like the only fault I could find in it was that I wanted it to be longer. And Alyssa Cole just like writes really well in a lot of different like genres of romance. So I just love it. Like I really loved it a lot. The audio cast is also like full. Regina Hall, Mindy Kaling, like a lot of really great voice people did the audiobook. So fantastic read. Could not recommend it enough. 5-star read and probably one of my favorite books of the year so far. Yeah. The next book that I finished in March was Promise Me You'll Shoot Yourself, The Mass Suicide of Ordinary Germans in 1945 by Florian Huber. So this was an arc that was gifted to me by the publisher, but I was under no obligation to even review the book. The publisher just contacted me via Goodreads and asked if I'd be interested in it. I said yes, because this is actually a topic that I do teach in my history of violence class, and I used to teach it in my gender class as well, because I do teach European history, and this is a topic that has gotten a lot more attention from the academic community more recently too. So I wanted to see what Huber did with this topic, and I have to tell you, this was not a win for me. I give it 3 out of 5 stars because I think this could be a good book for certain readers. Like a lot of the history in here, I feel is like laid out really well for people who haven't done a lot of reading on the topic. Like if you don't know a lot about Nazi Germany, about the rape issue during World War II, it does a lot of laying out of basics for you. So I would even consider this book using it for one of my classes because it does such a good job with all that stuff. But as an academic, looking at the topic and what the author did with it, I felt like there was not enough here. It was too basic. A lot of like the first part is dealing with first-hand accounts of like this mass rape of German women by Soviet soldiers at the end of World War II. And I felt like the author didn't do enough with it. Like a lot of times, he tells us the story, he puts in a quote, and like that's it. The historical background, the historical analysis, and the historical explanation was not there. He puts in enough in there that I caught it. But if a beginner to the topic is reading that, like they might miss those points. And yeah, I did not appreciate that part of it. If you're an advanced reader that's already well aware of a lot of this history, This is probably a skip, but if you're not, if you're a beginner to this history and you're really interested, this is actually a pretty good book to start with, because so much of it does do that laying out background, but obviously major warnings for rape and violence, and not a very happy topic. The next book that I read in March was Ghost Wall by Sarah Moss. So this is a book that I'd heard about several times. I picked it up at the bookstore in several locations and almost bought it because it's a thin, small book. But like something about it just like, I was like, no, I'm gonna save it, because it deals with a modern British family where they are like living the way people did in like foraging times during the Iron Age, is what the father of this family is really obsessed with. So I was like, I'm not sure I'm really interested. I would set it back down. Finally, though, my library had an audiobook and it was available, so I just like kind of randomly started listening to it, and it's actually really fantastic. I give it 4.5 out of 5 stars, and I like have a lot to say on this book because it deals with that topic of like a modern audience obsessed with people in the Iron Age and wanting to recreate what that was like, when it's really impossible. Like, you can't recreate hunting gathering in a modern world. Like, the environment is different, the landscape is different. It's just impossible. But a lot of people are obsessed with that, and they try to read like gender roles from that time period, but really what they're doing is superimposing modern ideas of gender into the Iron Age. Because let me tell you, this is the thing that I have the hardest time convincing students about, that the foragers did not have strict gender roles. And that is what the most modern scholarship tells us, that gender roles did not matter for hunter-gatherers. Whoever was a good hunter, hunted. If that was a woman, then they were still going to be hunting. If a man was a better gatherer, then he was going to be gathering, because it was a matter of life and death. And so gender was not, like, gender roles were not strict, is what modern scholarship tells us. And it's so hard to convince students of that, because this idea of man the hunter and woman the gatherer has been so ingrained in popular culture. Anyways, I clearly have a lot to say, so I would have had a dedicated review video of this book, except that I can just blame it on the pandemic, because it hit right after I finished reading this book, and I just like did not have time between that and moving. So there we go. But if anybody has any questions, you can leave them down below, and I'd be happy to talk more about these topics with people. The next book that I finished was Let Us Dream by Alyssa Cole, and I picked it up specifically because it is a short novella, and I already had it on my Kindle. And this was like just as we were moving. I needed some romance, something a little bit lighter, and I love a lot of things Alyssa Cole does in this book, but because it was right at the beginning of like having to convert all my face-to-face classes to online classes in the pandemic, it just wasn't, it could have been a 5-star read, and I think for other people it will be, but it just didn't do that for me. So it's more of a 3.5 star book for me. I love the way Cole talks about race in this book. It's set in the like 20s in the US, and the heroine is a black like cabaret owner, and the hero is a Muslim immigrant who is a dishwasher, but also really into like socialist radical politics. This should have been like a 5-star book for me, except the mood wasn't right. The mood just was not right. So anyways, if those themes interest you, I do recommend it. That's why I give it a 3.5. That's a really good rating for me. But the reading situation as it was got a little iffy there. The next book I started reading when I first started moving, and I didn't end up finishing it until after the move. And that was Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Machado. I read in the Dream House last month, and then walked into my used bookstore and they had this one, so I had to grab it. And obviously like read it really quick, and it's a series of short stories, a lot of them dealing with issues of gender, sex, sexuality, and some of the stories are really powerful, really good, but a lot of them also demand your attention. And while I was in the middle of moving and being worried about the world, I just could not give it the attention that it deserved. So it's getting a 4-star rating for me. And because I think there's so much to unpack in these short stories, but emotionally I just did not connect. And for me to give a book 5 stars, I need to like both intellectually and emotionally connect to it. And emotionally, I just couldn't at this time. It was not the book's fault. It was the state of the world's fault, but still, I have to be honest about what my reading experience was. There's a really weird chapter in here that was like oddly like intriguing. It's called Especially Heinous, and it basically like does like recreates all of the seasons of Law and Order SVU with like as if like somebody's just reading like the titles and like coming up with their own version of what happened in the show, and it gets really weird and funky. And as a Law and Order SVU fan, it was oddly satisfying. That's all I'm gonna say. And some really creepy stories in there. Anyways, at some point I will go back and reread this book because I felt there's a lot in there. The next book that I read was Salvation in Death by J.D. Robb or Nora Roberts. This is book number 27 in the In-Depth series. And this was a fantastic entry. This one featured the murder of a priest. That's all I'm allowed to say without really much. But it was just what I needed. It was just finishing unpacking, and it was like right kind of comfort food reading for me. Thank you. Thank you, In-Depth series, because I really needed that. The next book I finished was Every Heart a Doorway by Seanan McGuire. So I think everybody in booktube has already read this book, and I felt like really late to the party, but I really liked this book. It was 4 stars out of 5. If you haven't heard about this book, it is the first in the Wayward Children series, and it's about the school, boarding school set up for children who have like gone to other worlds, right? Like think of like Narnia kind of situation where they've opened a door to a different world and have come back, and nobody understands what they've gone through except for this school, which has been made specially for these children. It was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. That ending, oh my god, that ending. Really great, really great. And then the last book that I finished in March was The Wedding Party by Jasmine Guillory. This was another one of those books where just like perfect timing. I was just finishing up my unpacking, and I needed something light, something for my soul, and this did it. It just hit all the right boxes for me. It's a romance, and it is part of a series. So it was her 3rd book, I believe. Does the series have a name? Maybe not, but it does feature characters from other books. So the first book that Guillory wrote was The Wedding Date, then it was The Proposal. And this features characters that like connect. So you see the hero and heroine from both of the other books in here, just as peripheral characters. But I feel like this is the best one I've read so far from Guillory. This is where like the way she writes chemistry between characters is really good. That was obvious in the other books, but it is like perfection here. I love the 2 characters. This has 2 black characters, and like there's discussions of race because they are both very successful in their careers, and the way that race kind of has affected their careers or played a role like is discussed. The story though is that they hated each other from the beginning, so it's kind of hate to love. Right, so it turns out they've just misunderstood each other, but their best friend Alexa from the first book is getting married, and now that they will both be in the wedding party, And they have physical chemistry, and they think that they can have basically just a sexual relationship, and that it'll end once the wedding ends. It's a romance novel, so we know they're going to fall in love, but it was just perfection. I really, really enjoyed it, and I want to say that this is a book that I recommend for anybody that's thinking about getting into contemporary romances. It does have sex scenes, but it does a lot of the like fade to black thing that we see like in movies and in television. So because she holds back some of that explicitness, I think it's a good place to start. On the other hand, if you want a book that like has a lot of explicit sex scenes, probably not the book for you, because she does hold, like, she does that fade to black thing, but the chemistry between the two characters is so good that it was just, that's what really did it for me. And it's in the writing, like good writing builds that chemistry between the characters and makes it real for the reader, and I think Guillory did that really well here. I also think one of the issues I had with the other two books was pacing. Like her pacing wasn't quite right. She gets it A+ here, which is really great. I should stop now because otherwise I'm going to go on and on gushing about the wedding party. But that is it. Those are all the books that I read in March. If you've read any of these, if you have thoughts on them, let me know down below so we can chat about them. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.